Not only are plastics showing up in fast food, the concern is also how much fast food we are consuming and what's in the food itself. Well, please welcome dietitian Erin Palinski-Wade to give us the skinny on the supersize. Erin, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Tell us, Erin, what is the biggest problem we face when it comes to fast food itself?
Yeah, I mean, really the biggest problem is the frequency that we're eating it, right? Because when we're eating it on a regular basis, week after week, this is where we have the biggest health concerns. When you look at the data, you look at the research, they found that just eating fast food twice a week or more can increase the risk of metabolic syndrome, that precursor to type 2 diabetes, by as much as 86%. And I mean, I know you know this too, but it's the food, the majority of the menu options that we see on fast food, they're energy rich but nutrient poor. So we're getting a lot of calories, but we're not getting the beneficial nutrients. Instead, we're getting nutrients that could be deterrent to health. And when we do this too often, that's where we see the biggest impact on weight, on visceral fat, that dangerous midsection fat that can drive heart disease risk and diabetes.
Erin, you go on and you say there are 3 additives that are making us sick. So we need to address these. I guess the first one you talk about is phosphate additives. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so phosphate additives, they're added to food because they enhance the flavor, they, help with the food. But what we find is, yes, they're derived from the mineral phosphorus, and we need this in the diet, but it's the excessive amount that we're consuming that's the concern. So even in healthy individuals, if we have too much phosphorus in the body, what we see is that there is a risk for bone loss. We see that there could potentially be negative impact on the heart. But what I think is really interesting is some research suggests that when we have high levels of phosphorus in the blood, we're actually less likely to be physically active. So we're eating this food, it's raising our phosphorus levels and potentially making us more sedentary. So we know that's not going to be beneficial for health.
All right, moving on, Erin. We have a second additive, and you say it's making them sick. This one is potassium bromate.
Right. So with this one, we find this is added into the food because it's really improving the texture of the flour, right? It's helping it rise. And the majority of it really does get used up in cooking. The concern is when it's left over in the food. And even some countries like Canada and the UK and in Europe, they ban this in foods because there does seem to be a potential link in animal studies to cancer risk. The FDA does allow it in our food, but they do recommend that bakers who are using flour, they use unbromated flour. So I think that suggests it's not something we want to be consuming a lot of in our diet.
You talk about a third additive that potentially is making us sick, and that's propylene glycol. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so with this additive, again, what we're seeing is this really keeps the food more fresh, right? It's keeping the moisture in the food. And in small amounts, it is approved. The FDA does approve it and classifies it as generally recognized as safe. But when we look at people who have underlying kidney disorders or liver disorders, they don't necessarily process this as well because of the way it's processed in the body. So there is a risk there. But also, just when you looked at where this additive is found, it's in cosmetics, it's in antifreeze. So again, It's not something that sounds so appetizing to consume on a regular basis.
Antifreeze doesn't sound too appetizing. So, Erin, in addition to the additives in fast food, there are also nutrients that can raise the risk of disease. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us know if we're going through the drive-thru or going to a restaurant, sodium is obviously a concern. It's a flavor enhancer, it's a preservative. So we find a ton of sodium in foods when we're eating out. And 9 out of 10 of us in this country already get too much sodium. The goal is 2,300 milligrams a day or less. But when we look at where it comes from, 70% comes from processed and prepared foods. And obviously fast food falls right in there. When we get too much sodium, this is where we can see blood pressure rise. It can increase heart disease risk. It can also potentially accelerate bone loss and cause kidney stones. So if you look at where we're getting most of it coming from processed and prepared foods, it makes sense if we scale down on the fast food, it'll have a big impact on reducing our overall sodium intake.
It sure will. We always say, Erin, you got to halt the salt, right?
Absolutely.
All right, we do have to comment on saturated fats. What's your take on this, Erin?
Yeah, so it's a little shocking when you think about how much saturated fat could be in one fast food meal. So, saturated fat, a little bit in the diet's fine, but we want to keep it to less than 10% of our total calories. Because if we have too much, it can raise cholesterol and insulin resistance. So, if you think about someone who eats 2,000 calories a day, that's 22 grams of saturated fat. One large fast food hamburger could have as much as 33 grams of saturated fat in it. So it's really shocking how much saturated fat could be in just one part of a meal, not the entire day. And that's where we really want to be cautious about these higher fat meals because too much over time, it adds up against health.
It sure does. And finally, last but not least, those carbs.
Oh,
They
those
can
carbs.
get you every time.
Absolutely. I mean, carbs are everywhere, right? And so in fast food meals, there's a large amount of carbs, but it's the type. They're the simple refined carbs. They digest rapidly, they elevate our blood sugar, our insulin levels, and they can drive appetite. So you could eat this large meal and still feel hungry pretty soon after. And what they're void of is fiber. All of us need more fiber in the diet because fiber keeps us full, it lowers cholesterol, it lowers disease risk. And we should get about 14 grams for every 1,000 calories. Now, just to kind of look at fast food, and this is general, but let's say you're having a burger, fries, and a soda. That's about 1,600 calories, but you're only getting about 5 grams of fiber. So
Wow.
if we should be getting 14 grams for every 1,000 calories, you can see where it's energy dense, but we're not getting the nutrition we really need.
Erin, we touched on the marketing program that fast food companies have. They really market towards kids. How is this affecting, the playing field in terms of kids' nutrition?
For most families, if you're doing it as an occasional treat, it's not a consistent part of the diet, it's going to have very little impact on overall health. But where we see the concern with children is if it's a consistent part of their diet, multiple meals per week are being used as fast food because we're finding they're getting the calories and energy they need, but they're not getting the key nutrients they need. And kids are in this period of growth and development. So if we fall short on some nutrients, that can impact growth. It even can impact cognitive function, learning, and they're not immune to future health problems, right? Just like if we eat too much fast food, we could, be at risk of heart disease, type 2 diabetes. It's the same thing in children as well.
Well, there you have it. That was Fast Food 101. And guess what? You did it very fast. You were on point today, Erin. Thank you so much, Erin Palinski-Wade. Great job.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure.
I'd love to have you back.